This webinar, Preventing Exploitation Among Displaced Women from Ukraine, is organized by Strada International, the European NGO platform against trafficking in human beings, jointly with the GRETA secretariat of the Council of Europe, but also with Strada Ukraine and the Office of the Ukraine Commissioner on Gender Equality Policy. This event is organized as a parallel event to the 68th Annual Commission on the Status of Women, the CSW 68, the UN largest annual gathering on gender equality and women's empowerment, which takes place this year in New York from 11 till 20 March in New York, as I said. The Ukrainian speakers that join us today are currently all in New York and maybe can even tell us more how things are going. On February 24, and that's also the reason why we organized this event, it has been 2 years that passed since Russia's multi-front invasion of Ukraine and the escalation of the ongoing conflict, resulting now in a full-scale war. And last month, tragically, this also marked the 10 years since Russia occupied the Ukrainian regions Crimea, Donetsk, and also Luhansk. As we're all aware, the war continues to inflict immeasurable human suffering, and millions of Ukraine have already been forced to leave their house. They're either still in Ukraine or they're in other parts of Europe in particular. With this webinar, we want to raise attention for this ongoing war, but also reflect on what this 10 years of occupation actually means for people in and from Ukraine and what it means for their vulnerability for sexual and labor exploitation and abuse, including, of course, also human trafficking. We will look into what exploitative practices and risk of human trafficking are next to related forms of labor and sexual exploitation and how do they relate. We will look into how vulnerable are people currently that are displaced in and from Ukraine. What do we know now about the scale of human trafficking if we have this data and information and related crimes, and also what is done by the different actors to reduce vulnerability? And lastly, we also would love to hear more from you about the current challenges and also the gaps, and also what can be further done to reduce vulnerability. Before we start to discuss those questions with the different speakers that we have invited, I would now first like to show a video intervention by Ms. Katerina Levchenko. She's Ukraine's Commissioner on Gender Equality Policy, and actually she's also the founder and former director of Strada Ukraine. She's currently in New York and will later join us live, but for now we will first listen to her video message.
Dear participants, dear friends, I would like to extend my sincere congratulations and gratitude to the organizers of today's event for the opportunity to once again draw the attention of the entire international community to the challenges faced by Ukraine and our people on the path to our identity and independence. Special thanks to my colleagues from Strada International and Strada Ukraine for their long-standing and fruitful partnership, as well to other non-governmental organizations and governmental institutions. I acknowledge the support of the whole UN system, especially the activities carried out by the UN Special Representative of the Secretariat General on Sexual Violence and Conflicts in combating war-related violence and human trafficking as part of such activities. We are grateful to the Group of Experts on Action Against Trafficking in Human Beings, GRETA, Institution of Council of Europe, who conducted a rapid assessment of the situation in Ukraine and developed recommendations to address the risk of human trafficking in the context of the war in Ukraine and the humanitarian crisis. And we expect GRETA experts to visit Ukraine this year. 10 years of Russian occupation and war in Ukraine have forced millions of people to leave their homes. Russia's armed aggression continues, resulting in an increasing number of deaths, destructions, and displaced Ukrainians both inside and outside Ukraine. According to the UN Refugee Agency, about 10.9 million border crossings from Ukraine have been registered since the beginning of the full-scale Russian aggression. There are almost 6 million Ukrainians only in European countries. Russia's unprovoked war has caused a wave of solidarity and mobilization across Europe and the world. Many countries provided unprecedented humanitarian, political, military, and financial support to Ukraine. And I'd like to express my sincere gratitude for it. However, today we hear more and more about war exhaustion. Yes, we all want the war to end, and it is not enough to just be willing. It is important to fight the aggressor and provide comprehensive assistance to the Ukrainian state and citizens. This requires close cooperation and effective coordination between the governments of the countries in which Ukrainians are temporarily protected, the government of Ukraine, international and civil society organizations. As a result of joining efforts, Ukraine has a framework on cooperation between the government and the UN on prevention and response to conflict-related sexual violence. We have developed a plan for its realization and coordinate this process through an interagency working group on combating sexual violence related to Russia's armed aggression against Ukraine and assistance to the survivors. This group consists of more than 130 representatives from 55 organizations, headed by me, the government commissioner. A separate subgroup is working to combat human trafficking. Over the past year, we have made significant progress in delivering the implementation plan. I'd like to focus very briefly on issues in the sphere of combating human trafficking. In June last year, the adoption of the state program for combating trafficking in human beings until 2025 strengthened the state policy in this area. Last year, 118 people received the status of a victim of human trafficking. Among them, 45% were men, 40% were women, and 7.5% were boys and girls respectively. Certainly, this is just the top of the iceberg. The issue of rising awareness of the risk of human trafficking is being addressed through the work of the Platform for Assistance to Survivors. This online platform was created at the initiative of the Deputy Prime Minister for European and Euro-Atlantic integration, Olga Stefanishina, with UNFPA's support. It concentrates information on all services available to citizens in one place. The National Police has established effective cooperation with Europol, Interpol, and law enforcement agencies of European countries. I am aware that the ensuring of citizens' rights as well as Ukraine's victory is impossible without international support and comprehensive cooperation between governments and civil society. We, Ukrainians, must not get tired of our own struggle for our lives, freedom, and independence in our homes. I encourage you not to get tired of helping and supporting Ukraine. Glory to Ukraine. Slava Ukraini.
Thank you, Katerina Levchenko. So, as I mentioned already, she will later join us. So if you have questions for her, you can already share them via the Q&A. But let me now introduce the first live speaker, and that is Ms. Petya Nestorova, the Executive Secretary of GRETA, the group of experts on action against trafficking in human beings of the Council of Europe. Welcome, Petya. GRETA, we know, is responsible for monitoring the implementation of the Council of Europe Convention on Action Against Trafficking in Human Beings by state parties, which also includes Ukraine. And we know that the Council of Europe and GRETA has been very closely following also the situation in Ukraine. And as I just heard by Katerina Levchenko, also published recommendations earlier for state parties. I would therefore like to ask you a first question. Is through GRETA's monitoring of the implementation of the Council of Europe's Convention, what gaps and challenges do you actually see related to the protection, but also the assistance of Ukrainian refugees and other vulnerable groups that should be, of course, protected from human trafficking? Welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Susanna. Hello to everyone. Before I address your question, I would like to say that I'm really pleased to be involved in this side event on behalf of the Council of Europe, because my organization has been really mobilizing all the instruments available to ensure the full accountability of the Russian Federation for violations of human rights and serious violations of international law. The military aggression against Ukraine that started 2 years ago has changed the face of Europe and has had a profound impact on the Council of Europe. And one concrete step taken by the Council of Europe was the setting up very recently of a register of damage caused by the aggression of the Russian Federation against Ukraine, with 42 countries and the European Union having joined this so far. And this is the first important step towards accountability and compensation. Now, specifically on the issue of human trafficking, as we all know, the invasion of Ukraine 2 years ago provoked the largest displacement of people in Europe since the Second World War. There was an immediate outpouring of support, and the EU quickly moved to offer temporary protection to Ukrainians with minimal bureaucratic hurdles. However, in the first days of the war in Ukraine, the unprecedented and rapidly growing flow of refugees overwhelmed both the state institutions and civil society organizations, in particular in the countries bordering Ukraine. So we had planned a visit to Poland, for example, in March 22, and that had to be postponed at the request of the authorities due to the important logistical challenges they faced with the arrival of millions of refugees from Ukraine. Eventually, the visit to Poland took place in June, and this was an occasion for GRETA to witness firsthand the mobilization and solidarity of Poland in the face of the unprecedented displacement of people from Ukraine. However, it was clear that the first months following the outbreak of the war were the first weeks were rather chaotic. There was lack of coordination, lack of systematic measures, for example, to vet private transport or housing, increasing the risks of trafficking and other abuse. Very soon after the outbreak of the war, GRETA issued a statement entitled "States Must Act Urgently to Protect Refugees Fleeing Ukraine from Human Trafficking." In this statement, GRETA underlined that even in very challenging times caused by a massive influx of refugees, states' obligations under the Council of Europe Anti-Trafficking Convention are not suspended. On the contrary, they become of even greater importance, as the risk of trafficking is greater. And in this context, GRETA also recalled the heightened vulnerability to human trafficking of internally displaced persons. This group of vulnerable persons to trafficking was already noted in previous GRETA reports. For example, in the second report on Ukraine, which was published in 2018, GRETA acknowledged the vulnerability to human trafficking of the millions of internally displaced persons who were forced to flee their homes following the illegal annexation of the Autonomous Republic of Crimea and the city of Sevastopol in 2014, and also the armed conflict in Donetsk and Luhansk regions. So the difficulties which now have been faced by these internally displaced persons for 10 years have been aggravated considerably by the military attack of the Russian Federation. Another important step which GRETA took, and that was already mentioned by Katerina Levchenko, was the issuing of a guidance note on addressing the risks of trafficking in human beings related to the war in Ukraine and the ensuing humanitarian crisis. I'm not going to mention all the steps recommended by this guidance note, but I want to refer to several of them because they're related really to the gaps and challenges that we repeatedly see across state parts of the convention that GRETA is visiting. The first one relates to the capacity to prevent and detect violations related to employment. So the guidance note stresses the importance of targeted action by labor inspectors to monitor high-risk sectors such as hospitality, agriculture, food delivery, cleaning, domestic care, and locations where trafficking in human beings was previously detected. So the guidance note calls for proactively identifying new potentially high-risk locations where exploitation of people fleeing the war of Ukraine might appear and boost inspections there. Another recommended action is related to the importance of establishing and disseminating information on safe channels for reporting potential cases of trafficking and exploitation. Now, in this respect, what is important is also to mention that the Council of Europe Committee of Ministers issued in September 22 a very important new recommendation on preventing and combating trafficking for the purpose of labor exploitation. And all the measures in that recommendation are extremely relevant for preventing the exploitation and trafficking of Ukrainian refugees. This is also related to the important role of the private sector, raising awareness amongst the private sector on what constitutes acts of trafficking in human beings, the liability of legal entities in this regard, and also how to establish safe methods of recruitment of people entitled to international protection. The right to work and to ensure work opportunities for people entitled to international protection. And here I'm expanding it not just to the Ukrainian refugees, but all people entitled to international protection. This is a very important step to prevent human trafficking. Another recommended action by GRETA, and here I want to really expand, is to prevent the disappearance and abuse of children and to ensure that all unaccompanied and separated children are registered and benefit immediately from effective and protective care arrangements, including safe and specialized accommodation and the appointment of legal guardians. The prompt and fluid exchange of information on any missing children and the development of joint protocols on children who go missing is important. In this context, the Council of Europe is also acting by the setting up of consultation group on the children of Ukraine, which was launched in November last year. This is the platform of multilateral dialogue and exchange. In particular, one priority issue is related to the reception, registration, and care of Ukrainian children, including those from care institutions. There are a lot of complex questions in this area because once children have arrived in the Schengen area and they move to other Schengen countries, there is no requirement to register again. So there is really a risk of losing track of some unaccompanied and separating children in the process, resulting in fears that some of them may fall prey to traffickers. So this is an area where the Council of Europe is currently stepping up its action. Another recommended action by GRETA is to set up multidisciplinary task forces or working groups which plan and implement coordinated measures to facilitate the provision of assistance to people who have fled the war in Ukraine and prevent the exploitation. Another recommended action is to collect disaggregated data on presumed and formally identified victims of trafficking amongst persons fleeing the war in Ukraine, as well as cases which are investigated and prosecuted as human trafficking. And GRETA has also stressed that it is important to ensure the registration, housing, assistance, and protection to all people fleeing the war in Ukraine without discrimination, irrespective of their nationality or of being stateless. And this includes enabling easy and free access to health services, including sexual and reproductive health care, as well as psychological support, including to those who have been victims of sexual violence. Immediate assistance, including appropriate housing and medical care, should be provided to elderly people and persons with disabilities to prevent them from falling victim to trafficking exploitation, knowing that they are a particularly vulnerable group to abuse. Throughout its country monitoring visits in 22 and 23, about 25 visits, GRETA has been collecting information on steps taken by other countries, not Ukraine itself, to limit and prevent the risks of trafficking of Ukrainian refugees. And we are collecting information on any investigations, any convictions, any cases. So we have now quite a lot of information that we are reporting on in GRETA's annual reports. The numbers that have been reported so far by the countries monitored by GRETA are relatively low. Maybe the highest numbers of identified presumed victims are those that were reported by the Netherlands, where in 22, 51 presumed Ukrainian victims of trafficking were registered by Commissionerfor, 49 for labor exploitation and 2 for sexual exploitation. And there were investigations which were launched by the police and the labor authority, 3 investigations. However, in the end, no evidence of human trafficking was found during these investigations. I'm sure that we'll hear more about this from other speakers. In Germany, the Federal Criminal Police reported 34 suspected cases which have been registered. In two cases, the allegations were substantiated through a criminal investigation. One was for sexual exploitation and one for labor. In 21 cases, the investigations were closed. In 10 cases, the investigations are ongoing. In Ukraine, there have been 2 criminal investigations into the sexual exploitation of 2 Ukrainian women. One case has been completed, and there have been indictments against 1 Lithuanian and 2 Ukrainian citizens last year. The other case was dismissed for lack of evidence. So these are just examples. Obviously, I have limited time, but as I said, we are documenting this. It's interesting to note that in some countries which received initially quite a lot of Ukrainian refugees, such as the Czech Republic, Hungary, also Austria, there have been no identified cases reported to GRETA. So the number of confirmed cases, as I said, is still relatively low, which might be seen as a sign of success of the early preventive measures which were taken to protect Ukrainian refugees and mitigate the risk of trafficking. The level of awareness of the risks and also of preventive measures is relatively high compared to other humanitarian crises that Europe has seen in the last 10 years. However, we know that trafficking in human beings is an hidden or invisible crime, and the use of new technologies to facilitate it makes it even more difficult to detect and investigate. The social and economic vulnerabilities of the millions of people affected by the war in Ukraine are likely to increase as time goes on, which is why it is so important to continue monitoring and to continue acting in a coordinated way with rapid exchange of information and the investigation of prosecution of any detected cases. GRETA itself will continue to monitor the situation and collect relevant information and provide assistance and advice. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and also for highlighting already what's happening in the different countries. I also hope maybe also during the Q&A we can look a little bit more in the situation in different countries. Indeed, also La Strada International sees the diversity. We heard recently in Poland 19 cases have been identified last year. We don't know how many of them will be really formally also identified after a prosecution or a thorough investigation. But indeed, we see the diversity. Thanks also for mentioning the guidance note and the recommendations on labor exploitation that GRETA recently published. I have one more question for you, also because of the time. We heard in the video from Katerina Levchenko that GRETA has not yet been able to conduct the third evaluation in Ukraine. You also mentioned it, but Katerina also mentioned that you will still come to Ukraine. Could you explain us when you are planning to Ukraine, and also maybe a little bit more about the focus of your visit, which is of course, still from the third monitoring round?
Yes, indeed. GRETA was planning initially to visit Ukraine in 2022, and the visit had to be postponed due to the war. We received the Ukrainian authorities' reply to GRETA's third round questionnaire, and we have been negotiating possible dates for a visit. So now the latest plans that we have with the cooperation of the Ministry of Social Policy is for a visit in the course of the month of May. So we'll start preparing for it. As I said, we have received the reply to the questionnaire. It is publicly available on our website as well. It is very important to conduct this visit because, as you said, Susanna, most of the 48 state parties to the convention have already been evaluated under the third round, and GRETA is now progressing with the fourth evaluation round. So Ukraine is one of the last remaining countries from this round. And the last time that Ukraine was evaluated by GRETA was in October 2017. So quite a lot of things have happened since then. The issues which will be covered as a priority under the third evaluation round will be those which are the focus of this round. The focus is on victims' access to justice and effective remedies. These issues are access to information, to legal assistance and legal aid, to compensation, the application of the non-punishment provision, measures to protect victims and witnesses, including child-sensitive and gender-sensitive proceedings, prosecutions and sanctions, international cooperation, measures to detect and prevent corruption related to human trafficking, and also the role of businesses. So these are the priority issues. But in addition to them, GRETA in each country follows up on issues which were in a way challenging for each country in the context of the previous rounds. So in the context of Ukraine, particular attention will be paid to issues such as data collection, which we see has actually apparently quite improved over the years. Also measures to prevent trafficking for labor exploitation, assistance to victims. So there will be issues which we will follow up on. I'm really happy to hear that the visit will be facilitated quite soon, because I think it's very important for GRETA to go on the ground, to speak to all relevant stakeholders, and to document the situation. GRETA's reports are an important source of information, and they are also something that serves other organizations and the Council of Europe to provide targeted assistance and cooperation. So the first step is monitoring reports, and then the next step is cooperation projects. So I really look forward to this evaluation visit, and I hope to be able to take part in it myself. Also, the president of GRETA is planning to travel. So yes, looking very much forward to cooperation in this respect.
Thank you so much. We might get back later to you in case of further questions, also from the audience. We would love to hear, of course, more about your visit to Ukraine and to get that report and to read it. Also, the annual report that you mentioned. And maybe it's a good reminder for everyone here on the call. If you have any information that might be useful for GRETA, you can, of course, also submit that to GRETA, also as an NGO. Let me now go, and I think what you told us is a very good bridge now to the second speaker that we have online with us from Ukraine, but actually now from New York. Welcome, Ms. Irina Postolovska. She's the Deputy Minister of Social Policy of Ukraine for European integration. And your ministry acts actually as the national coordinator for the policies and actions against human trafficking in Ukraine. I'm not sure if I can, yeah, I can see you already. Could you explain us a little bit more what your ministry, also as the coordinator of the anti-trafficking policies and action, is actually doing to address human trafficking, and then in particular also to reduce this vulnerability of the people in Ukraine and those that are now out of Ukraine? Although focus on Ukraine, of course.
Thank you so much. On behalf of the Ministry of Social Policy of Ukraine, it is a great pleasure to join you today and share a little bit of the work that the Ministry of Social Policy is conducting to prevent human trafficking, particularly among those displaced by the ongoing war. And indeed, we do very much welcome the planned GRETA visit in May of this year and are already actively preparing for it. As we've heard, for the past decade, Ukraine has endured the devastating consequences of Russia's occupation and the war that have been exacerbated since the start of the full-scale invasion in February 22. The war has resulted in significant displacement of people and loss of livelihoods, leaving many vulnerable to exploitation and trafficking. As we've heard some of the statistics, almost 6 million Ukrainians continue to temporarily reside abroad, forced to flee from war, and among them, importantly, 80% are women and children. Within Ukraine, there are also 4.9 million internally displaced people, and our ministry is also actively working to provide the necessary financial assistance to those requiring such support. The war has also had far-reaching economic impacts and setting back 15 years of development gains and increasing poverty. An additional 7.1 million Ukrainians now live in poverty, with the poverty rate increasing from 5% in 2021 to more than 24% in 2022. Of course, this significantly increases the vulnerabilities among our citizens. And to this end, the Ministry of Social Policy has also been able to maintain, with the support of international partners, to maintain the social assistance and provide the necessary support since the start of the full-scale invasion. However, we must also not forget about the 19,546 children who have been illegally deported or displaced by the Russian Federation. As we noted, the numbers have not necessarily increased in terms of the number of cases of human trafficking. Since the beginning of the war, over 100 cases of human trafficking have been reported, but there are also cases of people being abducted by Russian occupiers and forced to work. And unfortunately, also, as Ms. Nestorova has mentioned, we still do not know all the cases, as we know that detection and reporting is still quite challenging. We also understand that risks may increase over time. As the full-scale invasion continues, people's savings are depleted, and the coping capacities of displaced persons and those hosting them are also being stretched. Despite a relatively highly skilled profile, many Ukrainians often do not know the local languages in their host countries, and this can oftentimes prevent them from accessing higher paid employment opportunities. Importantly, many women have also taken on additional care responsibilities and have to balance care against employment. Some may also not earn enough to be able to afford quality childcare, and therefore this also creates a risk both for women and children as well, as women may accept riskier working conditions to generate higher income, and children may be left in unsafe or unregulated childcare settings. For the Ministry of Social Policy, it is important not only to legislate against human trafficking, but also to inform citizens about the risks of this crime and how to avoid it. For this, cross-sectoral and cross-border cooperation are essential to combat human trafficking, and we have strengthened national and international mechanisms for cooperation between government representatives, international organizations, and civil society institutions. We are also actively implementing international standards, international legislation. As Ms. Levchenko said in her opening remarks, in 2023, the government of Ukraine approved a new state program to combat human trafficking until 2025. And the program envisages the application of a comprehensive approach to addressing the problem of human trafficking, which includes implementation of a unified anti-trafficking policy at the central and local levels in cooperation with government authorities, local self-government bodies, civil society organizations, and international organizations. And the state program also includes effective responses to cases of human trafficking, including documentation and investigation of criminal proceedings. Human trafficking is a serious crime in Ukraine, punishable by imprisonment from 3 to 15 years. We have also established a system of support and assistance to persons affected by human trafficking, including the possibility of obtaining a status of a victim of human trafficking. And this provides various types of assistance to support the survivors, including psychological, medical, social, legal, and financial support. For us, it is important to help Ukrainians spot the warning signs of human trafficking to minimize their personal risk, and also for individuals to know where to seek assistance. To raise awareness about the danger signs and prevent people from falling into the trap of human traffickers, we have launched many informational campaigns together with our international partners, such as the International Organization for Migration, various civil society organizations, to advise people to be vigilant, to seek help through hotlines. We have also strengthened informational campaigns on social media, television, border crossing points, train stations, humanitarian headquarters, shelters. This includes text messages, this includes chat bots, leaflets, various platforms where individuals can seek support, can find the relevant information. At the same time, over the last several years, many of the law enforcement officers have been trained also to support and provide the necessary type of information. And as such, the response to date has been quite effective in this regard as well. Thank you for the time. Unfortunately, I will have to disconnect now, but I do hope to follow the rest of the conversation at a later time, and happy to answer also any questions online and offline as well.
Thank you so much. We knew you had to leave, so in case people still indeed have questions for the deputy minister, just do it in the chat, and then we can still try to see if she or colleague can answer the question. Let us then go to the next speaker, who is also from Ukraine and who's also in New York at the moment, and he can maybe add to what the deputy minister just said already about vulnerability of the people in Ukraine, and also the human rights violations that are seen. Is the next speaker is Mr. Mikhailo Spasov, and he's a representative of the Ombudsman Office on Equal Rights and Freedoms, the rights of national minorities, political and religious view. And welcome, Mr. Mikhailov Spasov. Welcome from New York here with us. Could you explain us maybe a bit more about the mandate of your office and what you do exactly also to address human trafficking in Ukraine, as we understand that also your office has a role in this?
Thank you, Suzanne. Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon for the listeners from other countries. First of all, thank you for having me here, for inviting and for organizing this event. And of course, we have to talk about the human trafficking in these hard times for Ukraine, for my country. The unprovoked armed aggression of the Russian Federation on the territory of Ukraine caused new challenges for the prevention of the human trafficking system. And I'm talking not only about the national anti-trafficking system, but also about the European and generally international ones. Since the mass migration has created new and usually it's even more favorable condition for the human traffickers. In order to deal with those issues, the relevant department, which is supervised by me, was established in the Office of Ombudsman of Ukraine. And additionally, an expert council on prevention of the domestic violence and human trafficking was created. And I'm happy to say that this expert council consists of the representatives of the major NGOs who is dealing with human trafficking, and it is co-chaired by Ms. Katya Cherepakh of Strada, Ukraine. And again, we have a great privilege of working with her. And Katya, thank you very much for everything that you're doing. In addition, it should be emphasized that despite the armed aggression of the Russian Federation, the development of our regional network of the representative offices of the Ombudsman of Ukraine is currently continuous. And today we have 24 regional representative offices, which ensures the implementation of the Ombudsman of Ukraine power actually on the ground, where we have to carry personal reception of citizens in various regions and actively cooperate with public organizations in those regions as well. An important area of activity in the sphere of parliamentary control over the state of compliance of the rights of persons affected by human trafficking is also, of course, our informational and educational activity. And the Office of Ombudsman works to determine the state of compliance with the rights of persons affected by human trafficking. We constantly carry out monitoring visits of the state of compliance with the rights of persons who were affected by the human trafficking. And based on the results of such monitoring, we prepare relevant reports which indicate the positive achievements and shortcomings in the activity of the monitoring objects. And namely, it is the all other governmental institutions which are dealing with the issues of human trafficking. Also, our office receives appeals from the citizens who believe that their rights were violated and who have not received the state guaranteed assistance despite the appeals to the respective governmental officials. And I have to say that during the past year, the year 2023, we have received 21 appeals regarding the human trafficking, and 11 of those appeals were from the children. The stories of the citizens who turned their call to the Office of Ombudsman of Ukraine on these issues is very different, but certain trends can be followed, unfortunately. Therefore, with the beginning of the full-scale invasion in the February of 2022, the Ombudsman of Ukraine began to receive appeals from citizens who were held captive by the occupiers and who were exploited and forced to perform various types of work against their will. And behind each of these appeals is a difficult fate of people who found the courage to tell about those experiences. And persons who ended up in the occupied territories of Ukraine, of course, are most vulnerable for falling into a situation of human trafficking. They can usually be used in the armed conflict and can be subjected to labor or other type of exploitation. And in the occupied territories of Ukraine, again, the number of people who consider themselves victims of human trafficking is increasing as well. These cases concern, unfortunately, not only adult citizens, as I mentioned, and I would like to inform you about one case of the appeal to our office by the mother of the boy who was caught by Russians on the street of one of the temporary occupied settlements. And this boy was taken to an unknown destination. His mother tried to find the child himself for a long time, risking her life. The woman bypassed the occupier checkpoints to find if they knew anything about her son. And she managed to find out that her son was to be released the same day after the occupiers actually checked his phone. And however, the mother didn't wait for son and didn't see her son for the next 10 days. The child, as we have received information, was kept locked with other detainees, pressured and forced to perform work and exploited. After 10 days of hell, without any explanation, the boy was taken away and just left on the street. And the boy then realized that he was not in his village, but in the regional center, which was controlled by the occupiers. And with like last strength that the boy had, he managed to get to his relative's house, which was located in this capital, and then informed his mother that he is alive. So this is just one of the stories that we've seen currently in Ukraine. Unfortunately, of course, this story of this kid is not the only one, and the occupiers commit various various kinds of violent acts which involve a lot of citizens, and of course, they exploit them in different ways. What more I would like to say is that after the reaction of the Office of Ombudsman, 7 persons already were who were exploited by the occupiers have already been assigned the status of the person affected by the human trafficking. In the preceding year, 2022, it was 2 cases, and during the last year, we have granted, we have helped to grant such statuses for 5 more people. Additionally, due to our reaction, it was possible to renew the rights of 3 more persons who suffered from human trafficking as a result of captivity by Russians, and issued them the relevant certificates, which was granted the one-time payment of the financial assistance, which of course it's again things that need to be done in order to somehow to restore the rights. Unfortunately, appeals on such issues continues to be received by our office, and today the office is considering 2 more appeals from children again, and they're considering themselves victim of human trafficking during their stay on the territories which are temporarily not controlled by the Ukrainian government. And again, it's hard to imagine what these Ukrainian children who were enslaved by Russia were going through. But at the same time, we can actually imagine what they were going through, and this is the biggest, the cruelest thing out of all. In addition, other areas of activity of our office in the field of the observing the rights of persons who were affected by human trafficking is monitoring, constant monitoring of mass media, including social networks. And during the past year, 2023, we have found 33 messages that contain signs of the possible violation of the rights of victims of human trafficking. And therefore, each of such facts was discovered by our employees, and the relevant requests were immediately sent to state authorities and to law enforcement agencies in order for them to deal with those issues further. For example, I would like to mention that we have discovered information in the media about 2 cases of children possibly falling into a situation of human trafficking. In the first case, a man tried to take his 1-year-old child abroad from the mother for the purpose of selling for organs. And again, you can see the cruelty which is happening. In the second case, a woman, friend of the child's mother, tried to sell the child, who was again only 1 year old, and it's all documented cases which are already prosecuted. Again, our office immediately sent relevant requests to law enforcement agencies, and with the request to ensure the protection of those rights of the children affected. And as a result of Ombudsman's reaction, the National Social Security Service already had established the status of victims of human trafficking for both of these children. However, Ukrainians can fall.
Ask you to conclude also, because we still want a Q&A. So just to conclude your intervention.
Okay. In order to conclude, I would like to once again to emphasize that the civilized world cannot stand aside from the troubles that Russia is doing in my homeland, and again, only by uniting we can end the suffering of the innocent people, including children. And let's do it. And glory to Ukraine. Thanks for having me. Thanks for attention. We'll be happy to answer any related questions.
Thank you so much. And I apologize for having to stop you, but that's because we have more speaker, and I would like the audience also to maybe have the chance still to raise questions to you, either online and you can directly answer, either later in the Q&A if we have sufficient time for that. But thanks a lot, and you highlighted a lot of interesting things, also the appeals to your office that you deal with, and you gave a good insight, and we definitely will follow the work of your office more. I'm also thank you for the bridge you already made to the next speaker, because you mentioned her, Miss Katerina Cherepacha. She's the director of Strada Ukraine and a close colleague of me. I think for the last 2 years we have been nearly daily on the phone, but she's still in Kiev, still working on a daily level. So Katya, welcome. And I would like to hear now also from you, as working for an NGO, working for Strada Ukraine. Could you also, having listened to your governmental representatives, could you also hear what you as an NGO see in Ukraine? What's the vulnerability of people that you see, the calls you get? What's the current situation? Could you explain us a bit more?
Thank you,
And
Susanna.
welcome, of course.
Thank you, Susanna. It's a really pleasure to participate, and it's really pleasure to see the colleagues. It's such an interest to the event. Well, definitely, as we already mentioned, and as you already mentioned at the very beginning, the war in Ukraine actually is already continuous for more than 10 years, and the vulnerability in the situation of human trafficking under the context of the war is not something very new that Ukrainian is experiencing back to 2014, 2015, Strada Ukraine did the research on the vulnerability of internally displaced people. At that moment, it was specifically about Lugansk and Donetsk regions, to the exploitation and to the ending up in the situation of human trafficking. And the analysis of the research and the results of this research show that the vulnerability is extremely high, and being in the situation of the war, being displaced, unwillingly displaced, without planning, without proper preparation, without support, social contacts, without income, or exhausting all the savings that were before that time. People are really internally displaced people, or displaced people in general, are really would be easily to target when to end up in the situation of exploitation of human trafficking. They would hardly be checking, double checking the conditions of the work, the procedures, the information, the recommendation. Very often what was also indicated that they may consider that nothing worse can happen to them. They do not have other choice, especially when we speak about the situations when the territory, the village or the town where the person from is occupied, temporarily occupied or destroyed, or there is an active battlefield. So in fact, sometimes there is no literally place where a person can return to the hometown. And of course, with a full-scale invasion, that really all these vulnerability factor, they are boosted and multiplied in scale, because in fact at this moment, unfortunately, due to the Russian invasion, there is no safe place in Ukraine, regardless whether it's the east or south or even western part of Ukraine. The attacks are really covering the whole territory. And of course, being in such situation, also without having the full and clear or sometimes reliable information about the rights, about the procedures, people, those who became the displaced and those specifically who left the country while trying to escape from the war, they might be easy target to the traffickers, to the exploiters. And very often they might consider, and sometimes, I mean, in most cases, they're really kind of convinced that if they start to fight for their rights, to claim their rights, or to argue with the person, with the employee, for example, or the person who is hosting them, they will be either sent out of the country or lose their temporary protection status or some other things. And again, this is because of the lack of the information or lack of the knowledge about the procedure that actually leads to the fact that this is the work that really has to be done on the constant and the systematic base. Another thing I would like to mention is that speaking about the vulnerability and speaking about the risk of human trafficking, we also have to keep in mind that it's not only about the cross-border human trafficking, but it's also about the internal trafficking. And from our understanding, from our practice, we see that at this moment, there is kind of the less attention is paid to this specific area, because due to like a really obvious reasons, because a lot of other challenges are happening. But again, this is something that should be kept in mind, because the vulnerability to human trafficking and to exploitation is still actual, even if the person remains to be within the country. And especially, of course, it's relevant to those who became the internally displaced people. What is also I would like to mention, specifically speaking about the vulnerability, is that again, it may be the vision or illusion that the highest risk or the highest vulnerability would be only after, during the crossing border, if we're speaking about the cross-border trafficking, exploitation, or just immediately after the crossing the border. But at the same time, we do see that even after after a year of being displaced in another country, or even 2 years of being displaced in another country, the risks are still there, because different policies, different countries have different policies, sometimes, not sometimes, but I mean, that's also quite objective. There's the social support or some benefits that are available for the refugees, for those who receive the status, or those who actually flee from the war, might be decreasing. People would definitely be trying to settle, to find the opportunity and possibility to get to get a job, and therefore might be like a really easy target for exploitation and for use. That's again, that brings us to the point that it's really necessary still to continue the work. It's like something that should be systematically, and the availability of the information, explanation and accessibility of the services should be really there, especially in Ukrainian language, and especially in those, I don't know, communities, institutions where the majority of our citizens would be like easily contacted or easily addressed.
Thank you, Katja. Maybe I would go already to the next speaker because you made an excellent bridge, and then I think we can have some questions more for you in the Q&A. Because the next speaker will explain a little bit more about the issue that you also addressed, which is Ms. Yaroslava Dio, because she's working specifically also for the country on awareness raising and providing information. And since the chief specialist of the digital skills development and digital education department, can I hear more from you? What are you trying to raise awareness about, and how that is done now in Ukraine? We heard it already a little bit from the deputy minister, but maybe you can tell us a bit more. And Katja, definitely, thanks a lot. We'll come back to you in a minute.
Dear Suzanne, thank you so much. Dear participants, it's a pleasure to be at today's event. I'm representing the Ministry of Digital Transformation of Ukraine. And of course, during these years of full-scale Russian invasion, we keep understanding that preventing exploitation among displaced Ukrainian women is crucial now. Our vision is to use of digital technologies and artificial intelligence primarily to protect the vulnerable ones. Our main goal is to make 100% public services online. In 2020, we launched DIA. DIA is a mobile app, a web portal, and a brand of e-governance in Ukraine. Now we have more than 19.9 million users, Ukrainians, who can use digital documents in DIA app instead of physical ones for identification and sharing purposes, which is very much needed for displaced Ukrainian girls and women. Basically, you can feel safe and sound as a citizen without any document that is certifying your identity. But hundreds of our people lost them. Their paper form passports or driver licenses because they lost their home. So we created a special temporarily digital document for the period of full-scale aggression. It's called e-document, which contains all the needed information regarding one citizen. Such a digital document can be shown to police representative to confirm identity when crossing regions in the middle of the country. Many women and girls actually were forced to leave Ukraine and find temporary shelter in Poland and in other EU countries. So together with our European partners, we formed DIA-PL, which means digital document for Ukrainians that could be used to confirm their identity when crossing the border with other European countries after Poland and staying in the Schengen area for 90 days, receiving other services. We are working on raising awareness on this theme too, because we encourage our users to care about their digital safety too. In 2020, DIA-Education was launched. That's the national governmental platform for digital literacy and skills. It has 2.1 million users, who indicates gender 68% as women and 32% as men. And as we see, our women need information on how to use migration services and avoid falling into the trap of human trafficking. For this purpose, we united with the Ministry of Internal Affairs of Ukraine and created for our portal the Education Series Safe Migration to explain all the migration processes for Ukrainians forced to leave the country due to the Russian aggression. And of course, for those who need to feel safe, we can't be safe only offline. We have to understand that right now it's very important to take care about our digital safe too. And our ministry, together with the European Union Advisory Mission, created the guide how not to become a victim of online and offline human trafficking. We usually understand that it's kind of offline term, but right now the situation changed and we have this in an online world too. We included most ways that human traffickers use to attract girls and women to this kind of online and sexual trafficking work and how to recognize it. And the last one, but not least, developing a strong digital state is also creating a safe digital space for our Ukrainian women and girls. So we created a full model called Online Safety with information regarding cyber stalking, cyberbullying, potential grooming, and combating child sexual online abuse and exploitation. There is no better time to use digital technologies and skills to protect our women and girls than now. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much also for, in particular, addressing the issue of online, all the information, and we've seen it. Also, we hear it a lot from our members that a lot of people now also rely, of course, on information online. And it's very important, of course, that that's also addressed. I saw already in the chat that it was announced that we soon start to the Q&A, but we have two more speakers who we actually will now invite online together. And these are two speakers from the Netherlands, Ms. Eefje de Volder and Annemarie de Brouwer. And they are both co-founders and co-directors of the organization Impact, the Center Against Human Trafficking and Sexual Violence in Conflict, based in the Netherlands. We haven't talked much about CVCR, also because we initially had invited Ms. Pramila Patten, the UN Special Representative of the Secretary General on Sexual Violence in Conflict, who unfortunately is also in New York but could not be with us today. But we find a very good replacer here because Eefje de Volder and Annemarie de Brouwer are currently doing a research for her office. And so let me, without further ado, Eefje, let me immediately start with you. Could you explain me why do you conduct a research on the nexus between human trafficking and conflict-related sexual violence with a focus on Ukraine for her office?
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you for this invitation. Due to time, I will try to keep it as short as possible, but still get the message across. I think already since 2016, the UN Security Council recognized actually the importance of the nexus and the nexus within conflict situations of conflict-related sexual violence, CRSV, and human trafficking, particularly for sexual exploitation. And Ukraine was actually one of the first governments that, after an outbreak of a war, urgently recognized the importance of seeing this nexus and cooperating in order to get also justice for victims and to get proper prosecutions and support, etc. So this actually resulted in the framework cooperation with the Office of the UN Special Representative to the Secretary General on sexual violence in conflict, Pramila Patten, and her office, the UN team of experts on sexual violence in conflict. And within this framework cooperation, it's more of strategic and tactic on how to improve also the rule of law response and how to prevent and address conflict-related sexual violence. And that mandate actually includes also trafficking in human beings. So this is where also the nexus is found. And what we are actually doing in this research is because within this research, we do both an analysis of the legislation and policy. We have a survey, a perception survey among relevant stakeholders. What we try to see is to what extent actually the rule of law response is up to speed in the countries in Ukraine, but also to the countries where most Ukrainians have fled to, in order to address both trafficking for sexual exploitation in conflict, and conflict-related sexual violence. Because in order to ensure the survivor-centric approach, we need to have awareness of this nexus. We need to know how to prosecute it properly and in concert in order for victims to get the support and potential remedy that they need. So this is actually what the research is about. And yeah, it consists of both Ukraine, but also we include actually 21 additional countries to which most Ukrainians have fled to. Yeah.
Thank you. Let me to your colleague then, Anna-Marie. Anna-Marie, can you explain maybe then also to us what is exactly this nexus between human trafficking and conflict-related sexual violence?
Yes, thank you, Susanne. I think Eefje already highlighted that resolution of the UN, the Security Council resolution of 2016, because there, for the first time, really that nexus was made, and it was said that there was this alarming use of trafficking and trade of women and girls for sexual exploitation, being part of the modus operandi of several non-state armed groups, including terrorist groups, such as Boko Haram or Al-Shabaab. So that was actually the first time that it really was recognized. And then also after that, there were several other Security Council resolutions, and the UN Secretary General also in its annual reports on sexual violence in conflict would include actually trafficking in persons when committed in a conflict for the purpose of sexual violence or as exploitation as a form of conflict-related sexual violence. So here, conflict-related sexual violence was going to include actually human trafficking, and it also mentioned that it found evidence of these kind of crimes in different kinds of situations like Iraq or Mali, Colombia, Libya, and Myanmar. But I think it's also very important to highlight that even before 2016, this nexus was already made, for instance, in 1998 in the ICC Rome Statute and also in the elements of crimes of the Rome Statute, because there actually human trafficking was linked to the crimes of sexual slavery and also of enslavement. These crimes being sexual slavery being war crimes or crimes against humanity, and enslavement being a crime against humanity when there is evidence of ownership over a person. So actually the ICC Rome Statute does not really recognize human trafficking as a standalone crime, or human trafficking in this case for sexual exploitation. But when there is evidence of human trafficking, that can actually prove the fact that there is enslavement or sexual slavery. So we also see here that there is a nexus. And then you really also have to ask yourself, like, so what are the differences and also the similarities between those two crimes?
That's indeed a very good question. Eefje, can you maybe react to that? What are the similarities and the differences between those two crimes?
Yeah, just to keep it short again, I think what is most common is that, of course, both crimes have a sexual component. So, with human trafficking, it's more broadly defined sexual exploitation and slavery. But there are a lot of similarities in the CRSV wordings, like forced prostitution, also slavery, sexual slavery. But at this end, you see that also the financial gain that is oftentimes leading in human trafficking cases this can also be part of certain CRSV crimes. At the same time, we should also see that there are differences. So, for example, human trafficking does not include forced sterilization as a form of exploitation, which is the case with conflict-related sexual violence. And I think one of the most important things is that human trafficking in and of itself is a transnational crime, while conflict-related sexual violence, these are international crimes. So crimes against humanity, war crimes, genocide. So it has a different, it is a different level of crime, but it can still be well, under certain circumstances, be similar. So it is important, what we did also in this research is to just unravel, okay, where this is overlap, where are they different, in order to ensure that we can have proper prosecutions of these crimes, not only at the international level, but also mostly at the national level, where I think most likely justice can be attained for victims.
Thank you. Then I go once more back to you, Anna-Marie. Could you maybe explain how these two crimes, and whether or not in a nexus, let's say, together, but how can they be effectively prosecuted? Because we heard already also from the Ombudsman Office and from the Minister, so it's important, of course, that these crimes are also prosecuted.
Yes, that's something also we try to find out also in that research that Evie was talking about. So I think, first of all, what we can do is that we can prosecute conflict-related sexual violence as an international crime before international tribunals or courts, but also on the national level in case there is international crimes legislation. So if there is evidence of human trafficking, as I just mentioned before, then this can really be used to sustain a conviction under sexual slavery, under enslavement, as a war crime or a crime against humanity. And then second of all, both conflict-related sexual violence and human trafficking for sexual exploitation can be separately prosecuted, of course, under national legislation where it's available. Third, just to keep it brief, since conflict-related sexual violence and human trafficking for sexual exploitation have also a common ground in the slavery crimes, or the slavery-like crimes, slavery and slave trade provisions in national laws can actually also help in terms of prosecuting these crimes or the nexus between those crimes. Then another option is actually that we also looked at is actually terrorism legislation, because sometimes terrorist organizations actually use sexual violence in conflict or human trafficking or both as a tool to commit terrorism. So if there's terrorism legislation in place, that can also be an option to prosecute these crimes. And then finally, as a rest category, I guess there would be still the option to prosecute these crimes under rape or sexual assault provisions that apply in peacetime situations. Of course, this is maybe not the most or the best option because it doesn't really recognize the harm committed against the victims, but it can be an option if some of the other legislation is not in place. And because conflict-related sexual violence and human trafficking can happen maybe sometimes at the same time or sometimes after each other or independently of each other, it's important if the laws allow for it, that it can sometimes be separately prosecuted, sometimes together or cumulatively charged, so that all of these options are actually looked into.
Thank you. I'm also conscious of the time, and I know that maybe people have questions, but one more question to you, Evie, and then we go indeed to the Q&A. I also see that Katerina Levchenko is already with us. Evie, I know that your research, and it's very interesting what I hear, and I also know that many of our members and others have contributed, but I know it's not published yet, but could you already highlight some preliminary recommendations that you can make, if you can already, on the research done so far?
Yeah, I think one of the most important things is that actually, even though some stakeholders actually thought there was more awareness, particularly also judges, prosecutors, there is not sufficient awareness about the nexus. So it's very important to get this, because it all starts with, of course, awareness. Otherwise, you do not get proper investigations that look in concert to these crimes. Secondly, we see that unfortunately in most countries the laws are not up to date. So particularly to prosecute conflict-related sexual violence crimes, there are very few prosecutions as a result. But also with trafficking in persons, and particularly in relation to conflict, this is still fairly limited. So this is very important. And also we see that from a protection perspective, there is difference what kind of protection mechanisms there are in place for victims, even though if you look at what has happened to them can be seen in the same way. So in that sense, I think that that is also something that needs to be harmonized in some way in order to get it properly recognized.
Thank you so much, Evje. And then we go to the Q&A. I see that there at the moment, at least that's what I see, 3 questions, but maybe there are more in the chat. I know there's one question about the GRETA report. All GRETA reports, also the annual report. Oh, I see Petja is online. So maybe Petja, you can already answer this question. When can people see that annual report? And yeah, you see the question, yes? Or should I
Yes.
read the question for you?
Yes, I've seen the questions, and I'm available to provide answers. So as regards where you can find information about the data that I referred to, there is already the annual report for the year 2022. That's the 12th annual report, which is available on our website. But the forthcoming annual report for last year, which is still not public, it will be published in a month's time. That will be referring to the new data that I mentioned today. So you have to wait another month to have it on our website. The 12th general report has a chapter concerning the guidance given by GRETA and the first observations which were made in 2022. I can share the link in the chat. And then there'll be an update with all the new data in a month's time. Now, as regards the question or comment from Richard Petrovich, I mean, what GRETA does, of course, is in all the state parties, putting questions systematically to the authorities and also civil society about what preventive measures have been taken in the face of the arrival of vulnerable people from Ukraine, preventive, protective, and also any prosecution. So this is what GRETA is doing. This is what the convention provides for. And then when we do go to Ukraine, hopefully eventually in May this year, there the impact of the war in the context of Ukraine itself, with all its complex implications, will be definitely studied and analyzed by GRETA in the forthcoming report.
Thank you so much, Petja. And if there's other questions to Petja Nesterova, still raise them in the chat. I see there are 2 questions for Evje and Annemarie. I would invite Evje and Annemarie to answer them in the Q&A section already now, and then maybe later I can give you time, because I want to give first the floor to Katerina Levchenko, who's now also live with us. Katerina, we have heard more from you. You had the introduction video, but I want to shortly also give you the floor just to add a bit more, maybe even how you can raise the issue also now in New York. But yeah, give us a few more words, and then I also will still like to give the floor to Katerina Cherapaga as he spoke shortly. If there are other questions from other people, still raise them and we try to answer them. Katerina Levchenko, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Suzanne. Thank you, everybody. And I'm very happy to see you, a lot of my friends, and Kika, and Papa Chiripapa, and other colleagues. And I'm speaking to you from UN lobby, where we have event at the margins of 68th session on the Commission on Status of Women. And the issues connected with trafficking in human beings and sexual violence in conflict are in the focus of Ukrainian delegation and my personal focus as well. We were raising this issue during our meetings with Sima Samabakis, who is the executive director of UN Women. Today, after our event, me and my colleagues, Mikhaila Spasha, Katerina Cheripaha, and other members of official delegation will have meeting with Suzanne, with Pramila Patten, the UN Special Representative on Conflict-Related Sexual Violence. You know from my video presentation that Ukraine side framework on cooperation between the Ukrainian government and UN to combat sexual violence. And the first pillar, first chapter of this framework related to trafficking in human beings with the aim of sexual exploitation. We were raising this issue during events organized by different countries, including Sweden, and me and Katja were participating in it. We're discussing this issue with Siobhan Mulally, the UN Special Reporter on trafficking in human beings. But to conclude, I'd like to tell that really this issue is the focus of the Commission. Moreover, the the roots of base roots of trafficking connected not only with war and conflict, which we have in Ukraine and other parts of the world, but also with low economical opportunities for women and girls, for other people. And the main topic of this commission is connected with economical empowerment and using different financial and economical institutions to empower women for achieving gender equality. So I hope that this discussion which we have now really help us to systemize the different aspects of responding to this crime. I'd like to repeat again that we are waiting for GRETA visit to Ukraine, and we will be prepared to communicate with GRETA's experts, because for us and for government, and as well for non-governmental organizations, it's very important to have such a report as international tool to receive information, to monitor situation, and to advocate for the steps to combat trafficking in human beings. Thanks a lot, and sorry for noise around me. It's like the lobby of UN building.
Thank you so much, Katja. Indeed, it's noisy, but good luck there in New York, and for raising the issues, and of course also in general raising the issue of women's rights and violence against women. Katja Chirapaha, I would like to give you the floor. I know we only have a few minutes left. I hope that all the questions are answered. But Katja, can you explain a little bit more what NGOs now can still do to address the issues, the challenges that we have raised?
Thank you, Susanna. I would probably go directly for some of the highlights that from the perspective of NGO, and also will try to answer at least one of the questions that I see in the chat, if it's okay. So I would say that learning from the experience that we already received for those 10 and plus 2 years of full-scale invasion, what we see is that really, from the perspective of NGO working, so that the legal status, having the legal status and having the legal access to the work for those who had to flee from the country is really one of the crucial point for minimize, unfortunate, not to exclude or avoid human trafficking, but to minimize. At the same time, what we observe, again, as NGOs working specifically with with the people, it's really necessary to analyze both, the advantages and gaps, because definitely there are some things that working not that good, and we all know that in different countries there are some specific information, some specific provision, and definitely that should be taken into consideration. The analysis and the monitoring are very important, and actually NGO, apart from providing services, that they are actively involved in these areas as well as strengthening capacity. So the analyzing, this is not the experience that Ukraine would ever have wanted to have, or test on ourselves, but still I think it's very important to learn these lessons, because they might be useful not only for Ukrainians, but to any other, the countries or citizens who can be in the situation of, crisis, war, or whatever. So that was one of the important things. What is also proved to be very important is the cross-border cooperation between the governments, between the NGOs, and like a systematic interaction and support. With the beginning of the full-scale invasion, our partners from different countries, like NGOs, immediately stepped in, and we extremely appreciate its involvement and and really support. And going to the answering of the question, that was the question from what we have seen, which of prevention, protection, prosecution, and partnership mostly affected by the conflict. So that's one of the questions that I see in the chat. I would answer from the perspective of Ukrainian NGO. I think the partnership really became and remained the most strongest one in this situation, and really was one of the helpful. Definitely protection and prosecutions were really affected, and prevention also, but even not in the context of having the information like a leaflet, but prevention in a more broader context of this situation, like minimizing or avoiding the reasons of the situation of human trafficking, and the possibility to ensure the security, because this is also security, economical and physical and other. So I think that these three areas, prevention, both prevention and protection and prosecution, really were affected most in the negative sense of with a full-scale invasion. Thank you.
Well, you fast. I hope that the translation could still catch it all. I'm really sorry also myself that we have to finish a bit in a rush. But we thought 1.5 hours is long enough, and I know that there are a lot of parallel events at the moment in New York. I would sincerely like to thank Ms. Petya Nestorova, Irina Postolovska, Mikhailo Spasov, Ms. Katerina Chirapacha, Ms. Katerina Levchenko, also Ms. Yaroslav Dio, and of course Eefje de Volder and Annemarie de Brouwer. For all your support, and of course also those people who supported me with the techniques here. In a nutshell, we did discuss the exploitative practices, the risk. All of the speakers said we still have to take care to look into it and to keep on continuing awareness. And I think that's very relevant, because we also don't know yet what will happen with the Temporary Protection Directive, which is now due to finish in March 2025. We're actually strongly advocating for this to be prolonged. We are very happy that GRETA will go to Ukraine and maybe look for itself what can still be further done. And we are very happy to continue the cooperation with our colleagues in Ukraine and all the other stakeholders, and to address this, discuss this further, and hopefully reduce vulnerability of people, not only Ukrainians, of course, but all people in war and conflict. I would like to close here. Thank you all very much for your contribution. We will share the recording later on. Might you still have a question? Send it to La Strada International, and we ensure that your question will be answered. I leave it here. Thank you very much, and have a good weekend.